So that's my goal for you today, is to try and give you a new mindset around decision making, handling fear, and risk assessment. When learning to code, I bought a bunch of cheap courses. Everybody does. We first try to learn for free. We try to do it and figure it out because we think you can, because we read about it in some blog. And then we try to spend as little as possible, perfectly natural, perfectly normal. I spent a little over $1,800. So maybe not cheap, but it felt like tiny amounts at a time. $20 here, $50 here. And it got me nowhere in 4 years. Had I even become a professional coder in half that time, I would have learned a few $100,000 more. Just to save a few grand, I lost a few hundred. We all hate making mistakes and being made a fool of and making fools of ourselves. And I couldn't have known that. I was a bad decision maker. Welcome to Easier Said Than Done with me, Zubin, where I share with you the tens of thousands of dollars worth of self-development that I did on my journey from 37-year-old lawyer to professional software engineer. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to actually do those things that are easier said than done. Hi guys, welcome back to this episode. This is an interesting one because I've been thinking a lot about this and speaking to a lot of people about how they assess risk. Now, one of the greatest lessons I'd learned when I was doing my MBA was that people who are making money, whether it's businesses or entrepreneurial activities or finance, a lot of the finance guys just thought about risk completely different from how the rest of us thought about it. And it was such a massive state shift for me because it kind of felt like the wool fell from my eyes. I was in my mid-30s and I'm like, oh, that explains everything when I figured it out, or when they explained to me how they approach assessing risk, making decisions, what happens with mistakes, how you optimize for, sort of upside and downside. Like their entire world philosophy was so completely different from anything I had learned. Because to be honest, I'd grown up in a white collar household, knowledge workers, very much salaried professionals, and all my family's ever done for years is go to school, get an education, and then get a job and hold on to it, for as long as you can. And nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely the healthy way to do it for most of us. But because of that set of experiences, it was very fear-based. It was very avoidance of mistake-based. It was very much a hold on to what you've got and not an abundance, more a scarcity sort of mindset around this, for understandable reasons. Like different generations had different challenges. And so I never learned how to assess risk, how to take risk intelligently, how to understand the payoffs and the trade-offs involved. And so when I was in my mid-30s, I'm like, I now see how so many of my decisions in the past were fear-based. And fear is kind of what I want to talk about today because it's perfectly natural and we should get into it, in detail. But really, and I'll share my screen here, really what I want to try and do for you today is to bring to you a sort of venture capitalist financier's mindset to your decision making. Because after that MBA program, and this is what I keep saying, it was the most expensive thing I've ever done as a single investment apart from buying a home and taking a mortgage. And it had unexpected returns, right? Completely unexpected returns. It wasn't the MBA curriculum itself that changed my life, but all the things I learned indirectly from that experience and the exposure to it. So let's get into this, right? At the heart of fear, what is it, right? It's making a mistake, right? And typically these are what they are: losing money, losing face or embarrassing yourself, or doing something that doesn't work out for us. Okay, this is not going to work for us. That's often what we subconsciously, if not consciously, thinking. But let's take a step back and think, what is fear? Hi, if you want a no BS insight into how to change your career, whether to code or something else, and how to actually get job opportunities in tech, then please subscribe and like. It's no BS because I have zero incentive to mislead you. I just want to help you and give you tons of value so that you will consider working with me to get to your next career. Take a look at the description text below to learn more about the training I offer. But I do post content here regularly, and by subscribing and liking and hitting that notification bell, you will get to know when I post new industry insights for you. You'll also know within about 3 seconds if you want to learn more, but at least you won't miss out. Oh, and please follow me on LinkedIn too. I pretty much post there every single day. Just look for my name, Zubin. All right, so please like and subscribe to this channel, and let's get back to the episode. Well, fear is basically an evolutionary response. It's a biochemical, neurological, and physiological response to perceived threats. Okay, and I should add that here on the screen. So those of you who are listening on Spotify or any of the other audio channels, take a look at the YouTube channel to download this worksheet if you want to look at it and do some thinking on it. So fear is an evolutionary response to perceived threats. or uncertainty, right? Now, threats and uncertainty are very different. So, for example, the threat of someone punching you in the face is very different from the uncertainty of, if I move country, is it going to work out? If I switch jobs, if I change career, if I ask this person out on a date, if I, all those sorts of uncertainties, right? And fear was there in all creatures. It's there in all creatures as far as we know. And it evolved to keep the creature alive. Because in nature, mistakes can be fatal. They can be the end of that life, right? So in nature, mistakes can be fatal, or a lot of mistakes can be fatal. And therefore, in an environment where a mistake can be the last thing you do, fear is a superb survival strategy, right? Because even if you're wrong about the thing you're afraid, at least you're still alive. But if you're wrong about whether or not you should be afraid, and you ought to have been afraid, but you did something stupid, you could be dead. So in other words, that's what's known as false positive or negative thinking, right? So for example, a false positive is, I should be afraid of this. And then it turns out that you don't really need to be afraid. So that's a false positive. But in doing so, there's no downside really, because you're still alive, you survived, right? But a false negative can be fatal. In other words, this thing is not likely to kill me, and then you're wrong and it ends up that it does kill you. Now that's a false negative, but you don't get another chance to play the game anymore because you're out. Right? So that's a false negative. So because false negatives are so much more serious than false positives, fear makes a lot of sense because it keeps you alive. However, fear in modern society kind of makes a lot less sense, but it's still part of our evolutionary wiring because, modern society is a few hundred years old and our brains are a few million years old. So in modern society, the reality is most of the things, 99.9% of the things that people especially people watching this, 99% of the things we're worried about aren't fatal. Okay, they're uncomfortable, but they're not fatal. They're not even that serious when you really look at it objectively. And the reality is the vast majority of these things are certainly not going to kill you or even hurt you. It's almost entirely in your imagination. Just think about that for a moment. Don't be provoked or triggered by this in any way, because I'm not saying that your problems and fears aren't real. I'm saying the consequences are not fatal. They're not even likely to hurt you. At worst, they're going to be really uncomfortable and make you sting for a while. Okay, that's the worst. But most of it also happens in our imagination, right? Think about difficult conversations we've had to have. Think about the times we had a breakup with someone, or we went for an interview, but things went okay. And our imagination made it much worse than it was. Anticipation of the fear produces these biochemical responses. And the funny thing is, the way our brain works is imagination uses the same centers of the brain, the visual cortex and other parts of the brain, that are used to see. So imagination is, like they say in the old days, seeing with your mind's eye. And the same parts of the brain are operated, and the same parts of the brain are used for imagination as it is used for eyesight. It literally lights up the same parts of the brain. So the brain can't really tell the difference between imagined and fake. Right? Which is why you blush. For example, if you think about something slightly embarrassing, or you think about something that's funny, you will laugh, even though that actual thing hasn't happened, but you will still laugh or you'll smile, because in your brain, it's as real as seeing it. And that's just the way the brain works, right? So usually the things we're afraid of aren't true. Now, Seneca, the famous Stoic philosopher, said, we suffer more in our imagination than we do in our real lives. And he said that, 2,000 plus years ago. So this is part of the human condition. This is not something that's new, right? It's certainly not something that's recent. It's social media makes it much worse, though. I get it, okay? Now, why does fear kill success? Now, this is the key lesson I got from my colleagues during the MBA and the finance people I met over the years. One is fear causes indecision through paralysis. Right? That's one outcome. It's a very common one. I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm worried about this outcome, so I'm just going to sit still and hope nothing happens. Or I put my head in the sand, sweep it under the carpet, whatever it is. There are lots of metaphors for what people do when confronted with fear and uncertainty. It paralyzes us. The other thing that can happen is that we choose to avoid the thing that's making us afraid, and then we rationalize, right? Okay, for example, a lot of people would say, well, I didn't really think it was that bad a deal, so I didn't want to raise it with them. right? Something bad happens at work, something bad happens with your friend, you're upset, you don't want the confrontation. Somebody says something to you that's offensive and you don't say anything about it because you say, well, it's not really that big a deal, and maybe in the big scheme of things I'm going to look silly or whatever it is. You rationalize why you don't take action, right? Or very common thing, I really want to start that business, I just don't know now is the right time. Maybe later on in my life I'll have more capital or something. But the reality is, even if you have more capital, let's say you're 27, you want to start something and you think, oh, I'll save till I'm 35 and then I'll start. The reality is, by the time you're 35, your life circumstances are different. So you may have the capital, but your circumstances don't support your entrepreneurial dream anymore. So, you've kind of rationalized away the decision and lost the opportunity, right? So that's why fear kills success. Is ultimately it reduces your decision making, and the reality is that by reducing decision making, it drives inaction, right? Which is actually worse than failure, because with inaction, you never know. You never know either way, right? You could die wondering or die regretting that you never tried, because you never get any data or insight. If you try and fail, you get data, insight, and now you know. Okay, now you get the relief of knowing, or more often than not, you get the learning from the failure and then move to the next step, right? That's just how it is. But action's only possible after you've made the decision. And so that's what fear does. It reduces decision making, which means it reduces action, which means you're never going to know. Okay. The other thing it does is it reduces risk taking, and risk taking is essential, guys. This is a universal law: higher risk, higher reward. Now, of course, risk feels very uncomfortable and you shouldn't take ridiculously high risk. How much is too high? It depends on you and your circumstance and your appetite for risk. But the reality is, we often underestimate how much risk we can take, and we overestimate the consequences, right? That's the false negative, false positive issue. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But when you reduce risk taking, and this is what America is very good at, they're good at taking risks. When you reduce risk taking, which a lot of other countries don't take enough risks and a lot of people don't take enough risk, you reduce the odds of success and you reduce the size of the success. So it's not just the probability, it's the quantity of success as well. Okay, that's just the nature of it. That's just the nature of the universe. Upside or potential upside or profit, for example, is the reward for risk taking that's intelligent. Okay, now let's consider why this doesn't work for our personal goals, whether it's learning to code, becoming a professional engineer, changing your career, starting your own business, heck, even starting your own family, okay? Humans are good at noticing detectable risk, okay? I'm going to change calculate in the sheet to noticing. That's really what I meant to say. Humans are good at noticing detectable risk, but we're actually really bad at calculating it, okay? But we'll talk about that in a moment. So we're good at noticing risk, but we suck at noticing invisible risk. Now, for those of you who haven't, I recommend reading or listening to Nicholas Taleb's Anti-Fragile, where he talks about systems that become anti-fragile. Anti-fragile doesn't just mean it doesn't break, it's that it's not fragile. Anti-fragile actually means something quite different. It means that when the stimulus happens that would normally break something, not only does this thing not break, it becomes stronger. Or in other words, the stress doesn't break it. It's not neutral. The stress actually makes it stronger and more powerful. And a classic example of an anti-fragile thing is the human muscle. Okay. When you put it under stress in the gym, it grows and becomes stronger. It doesn't break. Well, it could if you overdo it, obviously. So there are limits, but in general, in the right conditions, with the right training, with the right pressure or stress on it, it grows. That's an anti-fragile thing. It actually gets stronger because of the stressor, right? So read that book if you haven't. It's really quite life-changing if you ask me. Now, the other reason why the fear thing doesn't work and causes really bad outcomes for us is we also suck at probability calculation. So even if we notice or detect the risk, right, we suck at assessing how serious it is. We just do. And, economists and finance people have talked about this, and behavioral scientists have talked about this for a long time. So we get even the detectable risk badly wrong. And then not only are we wrong, we then rationalize the wrong thing, right? So for example, have you ever wanted to buy something and you thought, oh, it's going to be really great if I have it, but it's kind of expensive. And then you thought about it a lot. Oh, it's kind of pricey. And then you decided, I'm just going to do it. And then when you decide to do it, you suddenly come up with all these reasons as to why it was the right thing to do. And it's very rare that we have the insight to say, I just blew that money away, right? We always say, but unexpectedly it ended up giving me this benefit, which could be true, and also goes to the point that if it is unexpected, that means you didn't calculate the risks correctly because it was unexpected. If it is expected, then you calculated the risks correctly. So we rationalize, or we discover unexpected benefits, and then we use those to rationalize, and they may or may not be as much as we wanted, or we may not admit to them being less than we wanted, but we always rationalize the decision, right? People do this with relationships too. Being in a less than perfect good relationship will cause people to rationalize why they were that person, why they didn't leave earlier. This is just normal human self-protection, guys. This is normal. It's not I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying, know yourself, know the human brain. This is our nature. We self-protect, we minimize to avoid pain. Okay, that's just who we are, and we avoid risk. So after we rationalize, now the same thing also happens when we're afraid. We don't take the action and then we rationalize, right? We convince ourselves and then we explain that we didn't succeed because, well, I didn't take action because it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right place, I didn't have the right resources, I didn't have enough time, I wasn't sure it was the right thing to me. And then when we don't get the results, we're like, yeah, well, the market was down. You can't trust the internet. The internet is full of scams. I hear this one a lot, right? The reality is the internet's not full of scams, maybe full of misinformation, but there are very few scams as a proportion to the overall data on the internet. Of course, the internet makes it easier for scamsters to be there. I'm not saying that the internet isn't quite a risky place at times, but my honest truth to you is we get scammed more often by our own thinking and decision making and lack of accountability than any internet scam. Okay, that's my honest truth to you. We will scam ourselves way more and way better than anybody else can. Why? Because we trust ourselves. And we trust our brains, and often our brains aren't actually doing the right calculation. And even if it is, our fears will make us scam ourselves. Our need to self-protect will make us scam ourselves, right? And so ain't nobody gonna fool you like the way you fool yourself. There's an old saying, something to that effect, and it's kind of true. All right, now part 2 as to why this fear-based thinking and risk avoidance doesn't actually work for us, okay? Because our fears are almost always wrong. Now, this is linked to the point about how we're very bad at calculating the probability of an outcome and a risk, especially a risky outcome, and also upside outcome, right? We're just bad at probabilities. It's not the way our brain evolved. Now, since our fears are almost always wrong, yes, to us in our minds, we feel that making a mistake is nasty. And in no way am I saying making mistakes is a desirable thing. We want to minimize mistakes. We can't avoid them, but we want to minimize them or make intelligent ones, right? And we'll get to how we make intelligent choices in a bit. Now, yes, of course, losing money feels awful, but very few times do we actually lose a lot of money. For example, I remember buying something. It was a gadget, right? It was something for my guitar. I didn't really need it. I thought I did. I got carried away. I bought it. It was a few $100s, and I sold it at a loss, right? I think I lost maybe $100 on it, and I recovered the cash. My life didn't change, but I spent so much time agonizing about that. Honestly, my life didn't change. Okay, and that's a position of privilege. I get it. It could be $10. It could be $5. It could be $5,000. There are people who wouldn't even sneeze at $10,000, wouldn't even look at it, and I'll be sitting there agonizing about it. Right? One of my coaches, my annual income was her worst month. So, that's gonna happen, right? People are it's all degrees. I get that. So when we make a mistake or when we do something that doesn't quite work out as to plan, yes, we're going to be disappointed. Yes, it's going to feel nasty. Yes, it's going to suck. It's going to hurt a bit, but it's not fatal. It's not serious. It's definitely not something that's going to, 99% of the time, it's not going to change your life, okay? Because life will go on. And we don't really suffer if it's a reversible mistake. And this is what I want to talk about when it comes to good mistake making, okay? A wise mistake making or well-calculated risk taking, okay? It comes down to this. Some mistakes have a capped downside, okay? Which means the worst case scenario is capped. There's a limit to it, okay? Example, spending $50,000 on a college. The worst case situation is you lose the 50 grand. You're not going to, because you're going to get some education. You're going to get a piece of paper that's going to make your life a little bit better. But let's say you don't think it was worth the 50 grand. Fine. I challenge you to actually tell me what it was worth objectively, without your anger and disappointment and frustration, okay? Because you would have learned something. So the worst case scenario is you learned absolutely nothing. You didn't go for a single day of class. You didn't crack open any textbook. Somehow you got the degree without even doing a single exam. And your knowledge after 3 years is exactly what it was before you started. Never happens in a college degree program, let's be honest. But that's the worst case scenario. Fine. Maybe you lost 50K, and that was the worst. You lost the 50K. That's money gone, and all that. I was going to say you're not going to get it back, but that's not true. That's not true with money. It's true with time, but it's not true with money. So you could get it back. You never know, right? Now, the worst case scenario is, okay, spending that money was a serious mistake, but it's a capped downside. The worst case scenario is 50K. Let's look at other things that are capped downside. Starting a business, right? Even something as extreme as losing something you really value, like when you lose a house, somebody steals your money or something like that. It's a capped downside. You can actually measure the full extent of the loss. You can actually put a number to it. That's a capped downside. Asking people out. Okay, you can't put a number to it, but the capped downside is no, right? You don't ask, you don't get, end of story. The worst case situation is you got rejected. Putting in small amounts of time. Now, this is a hard one because it depends. None of us actually know how many minutes we have left to live, right? And when we don't know how much time we have left, we don't know how much time is well spent, or badly spent, or where there's a mistake to spend some time. But things like, I don't know if this meetup's going to be particularly useful, or I don't know if this work function is going to be particularly useful. I don't know if I want to go. And you go for like an hour and a half, and it ends up being really great. Either you had a great time and you enjoyed yourself thoroughly, or you met some interesting people, or you learned something new, or it advanced your career in some way. So that's cap downside for, X number of minutes. You lose it. The worst case scenario is you at least get a meal, or you get a walk. So it's not 100% loss situation, but even 99% of it was a waste of time. Fine. It's capped. You lost 90 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. Okay. That's one category of risk. And this, by the way, is most decision making in life. 99% of decisions fall into this category. But some mistakes have an uncapped downside, right? And this is, where the evolutionary biology of fear comes in. For example, some mistakes like driving too fast when you're drunk or under the influence of something else on the wrong side of the street without your headlights on at night. Bad decision, okay? Because if it goes wrong, there's no coming back from that, okay? Likewise with unprotected sex with people you don't know the medical histories of, I don't know the statistics of it, but there are situations where you could contract something and you're stuck with it for life. Irreversible, right? You can't go back from that. Jumping a motorcycle across a ravine without any helmet. Probably you may make it across the other side, nothing may happen, that's possible. But if it goes wrong, that's it, you're out of the game, right? Like there is no way to really quantify how bad this can get. And in some cases, you know how bad it can get, but it's fatal, it's final. So your downside is uncapped in that you lose your life. So that's it, it's uncapped, right? Gone. But what about things that have uncapped upside? Now, here's the interesting thing to notice about this, guys. A lot of the things that have a capped downside, including shitty college education, if you don't like yours, have theoretically uncapped upsides. But we know they have not theoretical, actual capped downside. So we know the worst case scenario can be quantified. We can't really know what the upside is. Okay? So, examples. Actually, all the things that I talked about with capped downsides. College education, spending on your education, starting a business, asking people out, small amounts of time invested in things, or even if it's not invested, just pure serendipity and good luck, right? This is known as increasing your surface area exposure to fortunate upside outcomes, right? Getting in the way of opportunities, another way of looking at it. So these are things that have uncapped upside. Now, the thing is, with things that have uncapped upside and a capped downside, not doing it, or the cost of not taking that action is rarely calculated. Right? So for example, for people who think, oh, I don't want to spend $20,000 starting the business. Why? It's too expensive. It's too risky. Okay. I understand that. I really do. I've been there. I totally understand it. And I'll give you an example of my story in a moment. But when you think about it objectively, or as a finance person would, or if it wasn't your money, I bet your decision making would be a bit different, because you'd look at it and say, all right, the worst case scenario is I've lost the 20K. I could probably get it back in a few years, with the right hustle, or maybe even the next month. I don't know how much you earn, but who knows, right? Okay, so the worst case scenario is you lose a bit of money. Maybe it's 1 month's salary, or 2 months' salary. Let's say in this example, fine. That person takes your money and runs away. What is the upside? If it's the thing that's aligned with your goals, and your upside is that you could earn anything north of the money you've invested. Let's say you've invested 20K, you're worried you're going to lose all 20K. That's the worst case. That's the capped downside. The uncapped upside is that 20K can get you, let's say, 100K a year for the rest of your life. That's a 500% return every year. Okay, that's the upside. And that's the minimum upside, because, hey, you don't know what that opportunity is going to create, what doors that's going to open up for you, how you're going to change, what new ideas, a single idea can change your life, right? You don't know all these potential upside things. And so now the upside is uncapped and unlimited. You can't put a number on it, but you know the downside is 20K. Now, in those situations, it's really hard to actually decide to put in the 20K. I know this from personal experience. So, or whatever number it is. And so we let fear hold us back from making that decision without really thinking through, well, okay, if I lost it, it would suck. But is my life going to change? Am I going to lose my house? Am I going to go hungry? Am I going to starve to death? Is my family going to die? No, it's rarely that bad. Yeah, it's just going to sting a bit. But if it worked out and there's no upper limit to that, well, what happens for my life then, right? Now, that's how the finance guys tend to think about it, is they quantify the risk, they quantify the upside, and they assign probabilities to each. And they're probably wrong on all these probabilities. But in general, if the upside is significantly more than the downside, it's called an asymmetric payoff. And asymmetric payoff games are where people make money. Okay, so that's from the finance world. I see no reason why it shouldn't apply to our personal lives. Asymmetric payoffs, asking that person you want out on a date, could mean that that's the person you end up starting a family with. Who knows, right? Asymmetric upside, asymmetric payoff with a limited downside. So here are some of the examples that I want to actually share with you. Oh, before that, I do want to mention, there's an old saying, right? You miss 100% of the shots we don't take. That is so true. And that is the one that talks about asymmetric upside, okay, or uncapped upside and asymmetric payoff. In that when we don't take the shot, we missed all the opportunities and possibilities that could have come from that decision. We miss them all, okay? And because they're uncapped, it's potentially an infinite amount of loss because of the one shot. And the downside of taking the shot is you take the shot and miss. Not a biggie, really. That's the whole mental model to have. It's going to suck. You're going to be embarrassed. Okay, it's the last minute on the countdown clock or the last second, and you could take that shot or you could not. Now, if you take it and miss, fine, you're going to lose anyway. But if you take it and win, you go home with the championship. That's the kind of bet you've got to make with yourself in your life. So let me give you some examples in my own personal experience to bring this all home for you. Okay, when learning to code, I bought a bunch of cheap courses. Everybody does. We first try to learn for free. We try to do it and figure it out because we think you can, because we read about it in some blog. And then we try to spend as little as possible, perfectly natural, perfectly normal. Now, the funny thing I noticed is when I bought these courses, a couple of things. One is they all kind of taught the same thing because, hey, a line of Python or Java, whatever it is, it's the same for you and me, right? The compiler expects the same thing. So, everything's teaching is the same thing you find in a book. It's the same thing you find for free on the internet. They all taught more or less the same thing, but I didn't actually do them properly. I didn't engage with them properly, and I had zero support, and I kept jumping around a lot. Okay. So I did that for years. I did that for 4 years. Remember, I've talked about the story publicly. So was it cheap? Well, I looked at it, and over 4 years, I spent a little over $1,800. So maybe not cheap, but it felt like tiny amounts at a time. $20 here, $50 here, right? And I didn't do any of it properly, and it got me nowhere in 4 years. But let's also look at what I was talking about earlier is we don't calculate the cost of not having achieved success. We calculate the cost of failure, but we don't calculate the cost of the success we managed to avoid, right? So over 4 years, had I even become a professional coder in half that time, I would have learned a few $100,000 more, okay? Just to save a few grand, I lost a few $100K. And I couldn't have known that because I was a bad decision maker. It was during my MBA that I suddenly realized, oh, duh, I saved a bunch of money, but I lost like 20 times more. For example, had I chosen to go to computer science school and get instead of the MBA, I would have probably got a way better ROI, but I didn't know I wanted to be a coder at that time. I knew I wanted to get into the business side of things and do my startup. So the MBA was the right decision, but in hindsight, it wasn't. At that moment, it was right. So you could say I lost, whatever the 6 figures I spent for my MBA, I borrowed against the house, like plus the interest. So I lost money on that, you could say. I don't think so. It didn't get me to the goals I had then, but it opened up a whole completely different life that I didn't even begin to think I would have. Okay, completely different. Unquantifiable upside, unknowable upside, and we suck at assessing what we actually want or what probability success there is, and we don't know what we don't know, so we don't know what the upside is. Okay, so that was the example from learning to code and the MBA stuff. Now, my parking startup, I'll give you another example, right? So I quit my corporate job. This is after the MBA. And this is how I ended up becoming a coder. So I quit my corporate job. I didn't get any income for over 2 years, and before that, I was a fairly well-paid lawyer. I was a well-paid sort of middle management executive for a while. And I left all that and went without income for 2 years. I had a mortgage, family, and all the rest of that. And so no income for 2 years. And I put six figures in hiring the coding team because I wasn't a coder, in outlay and investments. I pulled it all out of the mortgage, a combination of mortgage and savings. I took a lot of risk. It felt so uncomfortable, guys. There's a blog out there about feeling fear, somewhere in Medium from 6 years ago. But I can't even begin to describe how uncomfortable it was. Now, the thing is, I lost both. I lost the income, I lost the startup. So I actually lost three things. I lost the income, I lost the investment I made, and I lost the startup, right? I lost all the money I could have earned in a steady job. I lost the entire investment I put down in the startup because I couldn't actually make revenue positive. So I just kept bleeding cash. And eventually I had to shut down the startup. But along the way, I was forced to learn to code because somebody who had agreed to help me out as a fractional CTO ended up having to quit, and because he had a baby, and he could go take the risk of the startup thing anymore. So, and I had all these contracts with potential clients that I had to deliver the proof of concept for, and so I had to learn to code to save my honor, and B, to actually deliver on the contract. So I learned to code. And because of that one thing, you could say it cost me several six figures, right? Because a few $100,000 a year in salary plus the investment outlay. It's a lot of money, close to $500,000, to be completely honest with you. And because of that, my entire new career has opened up. Okay, I got to be a developer at the age of 38. I started over a new career that I always dreamed of. I managed to get that, and then I managed to be in Google. Then I worked in Chainlink. So I kind of feel like I made back the lost cash. Probably not the lost time, but because you can't make back time, but I kind of feel like I made back the lost cash. And yeah, you're thinking, oh crap, I lost a lot of money. Then kind of still stings even now, right? What if I hadn't done that? I would have had the cash, okay, but would have I had this set of opportunities in my life to earn back even more cash? Probably not, because there's a cap in most other professions, and if you're not in tech, you don't have a lot of fun. In my view, like I wanted to be in tech, right? And so the life I have now ahead of me for the next 25 years is way more interesting, attractive, and potentially lucrative than the life I thought I had before I took the risks. But I didn't know this was going to happen. I did not know this is how it was going to play out, right? I thought I was going to be successful in my startup business. That's why I started, right? And it didn't work out. So all of us suck at predicting the future, assessing probability, but the reality is the worst case scenario was what happened, in the sense that I lost a bunch of cash. But I got a lot of value in exchange for that cash that set me up for this new life. Okay. So my conclusion here is we're all going to get it wrong a lot, and fear and risk are very real things. And we all hate making mistakes and being made a fool of and making fools of ourselves. But the serious question is, what is the worst case? Is your life really going to fall down the toilet if you hit that? And then also think about, when you calculate the absolute worst case, draw it out, make it raw, make it real, make it the worst, wartiest, ugliest, gnarliest worst case scenario you can possibly think of. Make it as bad as you can. Okay, good. Now you've got the worst case scenario, and it's probably exaggerated, but okay, that's the worst case. What's the best case? And if you can't figure out what the best case is, then your imagination starts to take you all over, because it's possible. Yes, it is absolutely possible. There's unlimited potentiality, right? Then when we acknowledge that we suck at calculating probabilities, we don't actually know what's going to happen. Are we going to have the worst case scenario, which is capped, or are we going to have the uncapped upside? We don't know. We don't know the probability. It's very rare that we're very sure. We're never talking hundreds of thousands of dollars or a massive life-changing event. We're talking about relatively small things that we're not really going to feel, drops in our life's ocean, right? And so we should then optimize for upside. And this was my big learning from the finance guys. Know your risks, quantify them, and then figure out, is the asymmetric payoff substantially more than the risk? And when they say substantially more, they're not talking 10 times more. They're like, okay, if the thing is going to cost me $100,000 and there's a 50% probability of failure, that's 50% of 100,000. Well, I value that as $50,000. And if there's a 50% chance that I'll make $200,000 of it, then the upside is 50% of 200,000, which is $100,000. So would I pay $50,000 to get a $100,000 when it's both risk adjusted at 50%? Yeah, absolutely. No brainer, right? That's how they calculate risk. They assign a probability to the number, then calculate what the new number looks like. And if the return is anything more than 1.5 or 2 times, which is just 200%, if it just doubles my money or it gives me 50% more, that's a great bet, and they'll take it. And that's huge returns. 50% is considered huge returns, right? So that's how finance people do it. And I think there's a lot of value in applying that, because the reason we don't do for ourselves is not because it doesn't work. The reason we don't do it for ourselves, it's harder to do it when it's your own money, when it's your own skin in the game. But it's easier to do it with somebody else's money. We make better investors with other people's money, emotions, and time. That's why it's easier for us to advise people on how to make money than it is for ourselves to make money. So hope this is valuable. Remember that the purpose of fear is to keep you alive. So if something's not going to kill you or seriously destabilize your life, then the fear is probably overstated. We suck at probability, so don't try and calculate it too much, but you know what the worst case scenario is, because usually it's a time or money investment. Often it's both. And so you can calculate what the worst outlay of time and money is. And then you say, well, is the upside significantly more than that? Even if it doesn't look possible for me right now, is it in theory possible? Have other people done it in my stage of life? If other people have done it, then why not you? And the reality is, the vast majority of people aren't going to succeed at anything they do. Failure is the part of the world. Like, being successful is a 10% thing. 90% of people will not succeed at a given thing, but it's not because they couldn't do it. It's usually because they gave up or they followed the wrong plan, right? So someone's got to be in the top 10%. So why not you? And if someone's got to make up the statistics. So it might as well be you. You just got to pay the price for it. And we're not talking about money. I'm talking about emotionally, overcoming fear, understanding risk, and just sheer grit and effort, so why not you? All right. Hope that was helpful. If it was helpful, even if it wasn't, no, I'm just kidding. If it was helpful, please like and subscribe. Check out the links at the bottom for more material that you can find. And if you're stuck in your career change to code journey, it's not for everybody. I get it. But if you think I'm the right person to help you, reach out and I'll see if the Inner Circle program is the right thing to get you to your goals. And yeah, all the very best. Stay in touch, and maybe I'll see you on LinkedIn or YouTube. Catch you later.
Do it. Just subscribe. You know you got to do it.